A small body hit the cobblestones. Hard. Her knees buckled first, then her shoulder, then the side of her face. People stopped walking. Nobody moved to help. A boy of maybe 9 pushed through the crowd and dropped beside her. He shook her shoulder. Nothing. He pressed his ear to her chest. Her heartbeat was slow. Too slow. He pulled a phone from his pocket. Not his phone. Hers. One number was pinned to the lock screen. A single letter. The boy's hands shook, but he pressed it. The phone rang once. Twice. A voice answered, low and even. The boy said, "Your daughter is on the ground." On the other end was the Vampire King. What he did next was the only time anyone ever saw him run. 3 palace guards would later swear they had never seen him afraid. Until that day. Stay with me on this one. Now here's what you need to know about the man on the other end of that phone. His name was Cassian Vale, the Vampire King, 7th of his line, longest reigning, most feared. If you wanted to know what kind of king he was, you only had to ask the men who had served him. The High Steward was a man named Varric. He kept his office on the floor below the king's. He had served 3 kings in his life. He once told a junior clerk that the first king made him laugh. The second king made him think. The third king made him walk slower in the hallways, in case his footsteps came up wrong. That third king was Cassian. He was tall. He moved like he had nowhere he needed to be. He spoke once, and men remembered it for years. He executed traitors himself. Not as ceremony, as fact. He used to say a king who outsourced cruelty was a king who would be replaced. In 31 years on the throne, nobody had raised a hand against him and lived. Not once. People crossed the street when his carriage passed. People lowered their voices when his name came up at dinner. Mothers in the lower wards taught their children that the Vampire King was a story, even when they knew he wasn't. That was the man on the other end of the phone. The morning of the call, he was sitting at his desk in the upper chamber. The window was shuttered. The room was dim the way he liked it. He had 3 reports in front of him. 2 were about a border dispute in the south. 1 was about a noble family that was 3 months late on their tribute. He was reading the third one when the phone rang. He didn't pick it up right away. The phone almost never rang. It sat on a small square of black velvet next to the inkwell. He kept a carved wooden bird beside it, no bigger than a child's fist. The bird was painted badly, in 3 colors. His daughter had carved it for him when she was 8. He had never moved it. When the phone rang, he knew it meant her. He picked it up on the second ring. But before we get to that call, you need to know one more thing. The kingdom did not know he had a daughter. Her name was Lyra. She was 16. She had her mother's eyes. Her mother had been dead for 14 years. The king kept her quiet. Not hidden. Quiet. She didn't appear at court. Her name didn't show up on the rolls. She lived in the east wing of the palace, in a set of rooms that opened onto a private garden. She had 3 tutors, a guard, and 1 personal servant. That was the whole list. Outside the palace, she had a different life. She walked the markets without an escort. She wore a plain hood. She bought books from a stall on the 2nd Street of the Merchants' Quarter. She drank coffee at a place near the river. She talked to bakers and butchers and old women selling herbs. She did all of this with her father's permission. I know, that surprises people. The Vampire King let his only daughter walk the city alone. But here's the thing. He knew the city was full of his enemies. He also knew what happened to children of kings who never set foot outside the palace. He had seen it. Daughters who never learned how to read a room. Sons who never knew the price of bread. Heirs who lived inside glass and cracked the moment the glass broke. He didn't want that for her. So he made a deal with her when she was 12 years old. She could go into the city. She could see what real life looked like. But she had to carry a phone. And she had to keep 1 number on it. His private line, the one that rang to the small black device he carried in his breast pocket. The one nobody else in the kingdom had access to. Not the high steward. Not the captain of his guard. Just her. If she ever needed him, she pressed the button. She had used it twice in 4 years. Once at 13, when she got turned around in the Western Quarter and couldn't find her way home. Once at 15, when she saw a man hit a woman in the street and didn't know what to do. Both times he came. Both times he came fast. But on the day the story turns on, the call did not come from her. Came from a boy named Toma, 9 years old. He sold flatbread from a tray for a baker on the 3rd Street of the Merchants' Quarter. He had seen the girl in the hood a dozen times. He didn't know who she was. He just knew her as the girl who always paid in full and always smiled. That afternoon, he saw her stop in the middle of the street. He saw her hand go to her temple. He saw her sway. He saw her face go gray. And he saw her fall. Nobody moved. So he did. The boy ran to her. He was small, but he was fast. He dropped his tray. The flatbread scattered on the cobblestones. He didn't notice. He knelt beside her. He shook her shoulder. Nothing. He pressed his ear to her chest. Her heart was still beating. But it was slow. Very slow. Like the beat of a drum at a funeral he had been to once, when his uncle died. He looked up at the crowd. There were maybe 20 people standing around. Old men. A woman holding a basket of onions. 2 boys his age. A merchant in a green coat. Nobody stepped forward. He understood why. Vampires walked the city. So did things that hunted vampires. A girl who had collapsed in the street could be sick. She could also be something else. Something you didn't want to be near when she woke up. Toma didn't care. He had seen this girl smile. He patted her cloak. He felt the shape of a phone in her inner pocket. He pulled it out. It was a small black thing, lighter than he expected. He didn't know how to use a phone like this. He had only used the public box on the corner of his street, the one his mother let him put a coin in to call her at the laundry. But the screen of this phone was already lit. There was a number pinned to it. Just one. A single letter for a name. The letter F. He didn't know what F meant. He didn't have time to wonder. He pressed it. The phone rang once. Twice. A voice answered on the 3rd ring. It was low. Calm. Unhurried. Said one word. Lyra. Toma's mouth went dry. He didn't know who Lyra was. He looked down at the girl. He didn't know her name. He only knew the way she said thank you for the bread. He said, I'm not Lyra. I'm Toma. I sell bread. Your daughter is on the ground. There was no answer for a moment. Then the voice said, Where? Just the word. Not a question. A demand. Toma told him. 3rd Street, Merchants' Quarter. By the brass fountain. The voice said, Don't move her. Don't let anyone else touch her. Stay with her. Tell me how she's breathing. Toma said, Slow. The voice said, I'm coming. The line went dead. Toma sat there in the street with the phone in his small hand and the girl with the gray face beside him. He didn't know what was about to happen. He had assumed her father was a city man, a tradesman, a rich man maybe, given how nice the phone was. He thought maybe the man would arrive in 20 minutes. Or 30. Or longer if traffic was bad. He was wrong. What you have to understand about the upper chamber of the Vale Palace is that it is half a mile from the Merchants' Quarter. The palace sits on the rise above the city. There is a stone road that loops down through 3 gates, 2 checkpoints, and a guarded courtyard before it reaches the streets where ordinary people live. On a normal day in a carriage with the road clear, a king's man can make that trip in 15 minutes. Cashin Vale made it in 3. Here is what people saw. The high steward was on the floor below, pacing through a dispute with a tax collector. When he heard a sound he had never heard before in 30 years of service. He heard the king move. He heard the door of the upper chamber blow open. He heard footsteps on the stone of the great staircase. Not slow steps. Not the measured walk the king used in front of his court. Running steps. Running steps that took the staircase 3 at a time. Varric came out of his office to the railing of the lower hall. He looked up just in time to see the king pass him. Black coat open, hair pushed back, eyes black, the way they went when something terrible was about to happen to somebody. Varric said, "Your Majesty." The king didn't stop. Varric said it louder. "Your Majesty, what is happening?" The king said 2 words over his shoulder. He said, "My daughter." That was all. He went through the courtyard at a run. The guards at the inner gate didn't even have time to bow. He went past them like wind. He didn't take a carriage. He didn't take a horse. He went on foot. A vampire of his age and his line can move faster than a horse on open ground for a short distance. Most kings don't show this. It is considered undignified. It is something they do behind closed doors in the practice yards where only their masters-at-arms can see. Cashin Vale did it down the main road of his own city, in broad daylight, past the outer gate, past the customs house, past the smith, down through the merchant's quarter. People who saw him pass said later that they could not describe him. Only that something dark and very fast went by, and they felt cold for a full minute after. He hit the 3rd Street in 3 minutes flat. Toma was still kneeling in the street with Lyra's head in his lap. He looked up. He saw a tall man walking toward them. The man was not running anymore. The running had stopped 20 paces away. He was walking now, fast but walking. The crowd parted for him without being asked. Not because they recognized him. Because of what he was. They felt it before they saw it. He came to a stop in front of Toma. He went down on one knee. He looked at his daughter. His face did something Toma did not have words for. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was the face of a man who had just seen the only thing in the world he could not afford to lose. He took her hand. He pressed 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist. He bent his ear close to her mouth. He stayed like that for what felt like a long time, but was probably only 10 seconds. Then he straightened up and looked at Toma for the first time. He said, "What did you see?" Toma told him. The girl walking, her hand at her temple, the sway, the fall. The king listened without blinking. Then he picked her up, slowly, carefully, like a man lifting something he was afraid of breaking. He held her against his chest. Her head fell against his shoulder. He looked at Toma one more time. He said, "Come with me." And the boy did. The carriage that came for them was not the king's official carriage. It was a smaller one, faster, the kind nobody knew he owned. It was waiting at the end of the street. The driver was a vampire Toma had never seen before. The driver did not ask questions. He held the door open. The king got in with Lyra in his arms. He pointed at Toma and said, "In." Toma got in. The doors closed. The carriage moved. It was the longest ride of Toma's 9 years. By the time they reached the palace, the king's physician was already in the lower courtyard, waiting. A woman, pale, small, 2 centuries old. She had been told only that the princess was unconscious. She did not ask why or how. She took Lyra from his arms. She carried her up the side stairs to a room Toma had never imagined existed. White walls, a bed in the center, glass jars on every shelf. The physician laid Lyra down. She bent over her. She lifted her eyelid. She listened to her heart. She felt her throat. She was very quiet. The king stood at the foot of the bed. Toma stood by the door. After 10 minutes, the physician straightened up. She turned to the king. She said, "She is going to live." The king did not move. She said, "Her pulse is slowing back to normal. She is breathing easier. Whatever it was, the worst of it has passed. She will sleep for some hours. Then she will wake." The king closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were not black anymore. They were the color of a man who had just been pulled out of water. He sat down. He had not sat down in front of another person in 11 years. He sat down on the wooden chair by the bed. He took his daughter's hand. He brought it to his forehead. The room went very quiet. The boy stood by the door and did not breathe. He thought, I helped. He thought, she is going to be fine. He thought, this man is just a father. For 1 minute in that white room, anyone watching would have thought the same thing. It was not over. It was only just beginning. The physician went to her workbench in the corner. She picked up a small porcelain dish. She had run a test on a few drops of Lyra's blood while the king was sitting by the bed. She came back to the king and stood in front of him. She said, Your Majesty. He looked up. She said, It was not exhaustion. He did not speak. She said, It was a poison, a specific one. It is called nightroot. It is brewed from a plant that grows only in the mountains north of the kingdom, in 3 monasteries that I know of. It does not kill, paralyzes, puts the victim into a sleep that looks like death. The body slows, the heart slows, the mind goes quiet. If a vampire drinks the blood of someone under nightroot, the vampire is paralyzed too, for several hours. It is not a weapon used for assassination, Your Majesty. It is a weapon used for capture. The king stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not move quickly. He stood up the way a wall stands up. He said, Capture. She said, Yes. Whoever did this did not want her dead. They wanted her taken. The room changed. This is the moment in the story when you need to understand what just happened. Everyone in that room had been thinking one thing. They had been thinking the princess collapsed in the street. A medical accident. A small mercy that Toma was there. A close call. Now they were thinking something else. They were thinking, somebody had been waiting in that street. Somebody had put nightroot in something she ate or drank that morning. Somebody had been timing the dose to make her fall in a public place where they could grab her. The only reason Lyra Vale was lying in this white room and not in a wagon halfway to the northern border was a 9-year-old boy who sold bread. The king turned to Toma. For the first time, he really looked at him. He said, Did you see anyone near her before she fell? Toma thought hard. He was good at remembering things. He had to be. His mother said memory was the only thing poor boys had that nobody could take from them. He said, Yes. The king said, Tell me. Toma said, There was a man in a gray cloak. He was standing at the corner of the alley by the wine cellars. He was watching her. I noticed because he wasn't doing anything. People in the street are always doing something. He was just standing. The king said, Describe him. Toma said, Tall, thin, a scar through his eyebrow, left side. He wore a ring on his right hand, a silver ring with a black stone. I saw it because his hand was hanging by his side. The king's face did not change, but Toma saw something move behind his eyes. The king said, What did the man do when she fell? Toma said, He started walking toward her, fast. But when I dropped my tray and ran, he stopped. He looked at me. Then he turned and went into the alley. The king said, Would you know him if you saw him again? Toma said, Yes. The king nodded once. He did not thank Toma. Not yet. He turned to the physician. He said, Stay with her. Do not let anyone in this room. Anyone. Not Varric. Not the captain of the guard. Not me if you do not see my face. If she wakes, she is to be told nothing. She fainted. She has been ill. That is all. The physician bowed her head. He turned to Toma. He said, You are coming with me. Toma followed. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. This is where the story turns. You don't want to miss what comes next. The king walked Toma down to a smaller chamber on the floor below. He did not summon Varric. He did not summon the captain. He went alone with the boy. He sat Toma down at a long wooden table. He pushed a piece of paper across to him. He said, Draw the ring. Toma drew it. He was not a good artist, but he was careful. He drew the band, the stone, the shape of the setting. He pushed the paper back. The king looked at the drawing for a long time. He did not say anything for almost a minute. Then he said very quietly, I know that ring. Toma did not ask whose it was. The king did not tell him. But here is what he knew and what Toma did not. There were exactly 4 men in the kingdom of his blood and rank who wore that ring. It was the seal of the High Council of Northern Lords. It was given on appointment, could not be removed and worn by another man. The 4 men who held it were men the vampire king had elevated himself, when he took the throne, to keep the northern provinces loyal. The man Toma had seen was one of them. That meant the attempt on Lyra had not come from a foreign power. It had not come from the rebel cells in the southern marshes. It had not come from the old families who had hated him for 30 years. It had come from inside his own court. The king stood up. He went to the window. He looked out over his city. His city had been quiet for 31 years because nobody had been stupid enough to try this. Somebody had just been stupid enough. He turned back to Toma. He said, I need you to do one more thing for me. I need you to look at 4 faces. They will be in a room together in 2 hours. I need you to tell me which one was in that alley today. You will be safe. You will stand behind a screen. They will not see you. Will you do this for me? Toma was 9. He thought about his mother who would worry. He thought about his tray of bread, lost in the street. He thought about the girl with the gray face, asleep in a white room. He said, yes. The king said, good. That was the moment the boy understood, in his small bones, that he was no longer a bread seller. He was a witness, and the man across from him was not a man. He was a hunter. The 4 lords were summoned to the king's council room without warning. This was not unusual. The king did this from time to time. They came on horseback separately from their lodges in the upper district. They were told only that there was a matter of provincial taxation to discuss. The first one arrived in 20 minutes. A heavy-set man with a red beard. The second came 40 minutes later. A small wiry one with a limp. The third was older, white-haired, walking with a cane. The fourth came last. Tall, thin, a scar through the left eyebrow, a silver ring on his right hand, a black stone. His name was Lord Cale Renwick. He was the king's second cousin. The 4 of them sat down at the council table. The king sat at the head. The room had no other people in it, or so they thought. Behind the wooden screen at the back of the room, Toma was sitting on a small stool, with his eye to a gap in the wood. He had already nodded. The king poured a glass of wine for each of them, including himself. This was not something he did. The lords noticed. 2 of them exchanged a look. The king raised his glass. He said, to the kingdom. They drank. Then the king set his glass down very carefully and said, Lord Renwick, stand up. Renwick stood up. His face was the same face it had been when he arrived. Polite, calm. The face of a man who had been at court for 20 years. The king said, where were you this afternoon between the hours of 1 and 3? Renwick said, without missing a beat, in my study, Your Majesty, going over the harvest tallies for the Eastern Province. The king said, was anyone with you? Renwick said, my steward. Briefly, the king nodded as if this was a satisfactory answer. He looked down at his glass. He turned the stem of it once between his fingers. He said, Lord Renwick, do you know what I do not understand about men of your station? Renwick said, Your Majesty. The king said, I do not understand why men of your station never check the second street of the merchant's quarter on the way back from poisoning a 16-year-old girl, to make sure no one was looking at you. Nobody at the table breathed. Renwick's face did something. Not much. Just a small thing at the corner of his mouth. But a man who has been at court for 20 years does not let his face do that for nothing. The king said, There was a boy. Renwick said, Your Majesty. The king said, There was a boy selling bread. A boy you did not see. A boy who saw your ring. A boy who is in this room right now. Renwick said, Your Majesty, I do not know what you... The king said, "Do not lie to me again." He said it without raising his voice. It was the quietest sentence in the room. It was also the loudest. Renwick stopped talking. The king stood up. He walked around the long side of the table. The other three lords sat very still. They were looking at their hands. The white-haired one was breathing through his nose, slow, deliberate, the way men do when they want to be invisible. The king came to a stop 2 paces from Renwick. He said, "Tell me who paid you." Renwick said nothing. The king said, "Tell me who paid you, and you will live to be exiled to the Western Islands, with your wife, with your sons. You will not be at court. You will not be in my kingdom, but you will live." Renwick still said nothing. The king said, "The other option is that I take you apart in this room, in front of these 3 men, so that they go home and tell their families exactly what it costs to come near my daughter. Choose." Renwick's mouth was dry. You could see it. He said, finally, "It was not me, the poison. It was an apothecary, a woman in the lower wards. Her name is Hala. She was paid to put it in the coffee at the place by the river. I only watched. I was only there to confirm. I did not put hands on her. I would not have. I swear on my sons." The king said, "Who paid you?" Renwick said, "It was the Order of the Pale Hand." The room cooled by 10 degrees. The Order of the Pale Hand was an old organization. Older than the Veil Line. Older than the kingdom. It was a brotherhood of vampires who believed that kings should be made by blood, not by inheritance. They had tried to kill 3 of Cashin's predecessors. They had failed every time. They had been quiet for 40 years. Quiet enough that everyone, including the king, had assumed they were gone. They had not been gone. They had been waiting. The king said, "Why my daughter? Why not me?" Renwick said, "Because they could take her, your majesty. They could not take you. They wanted leverage. They wanted to make you kneel." The king laughed. It was a sound the lords at the table had never heard before. It was not a happy sound. It was not even a bitter one. It was the sound of a man hearing how badly someone had misunderstood him. He said, "They wanted to make me kneel." Renwick said, "Yes." The king said, "Lord Renwick, do you know what happens when a man tries to make me kneel?" Renwick did not answer. The king said, "He kneels first." He did not move fast. That was what the lords told later. He was, in fact, slow, almost gentle. He took Renwick by the front of his coat. He set him down on his knees in the center of the council room. He did not strike him. He did not draw a blade. He simply held him there and looked down at him and waited. Renwick understood. He started to talk. He named names. 3. 2 of them were inside the kingdom. 1 was abroad. He gave addresses. He gave routines. He gave the chain of command, the way it ran from the apothecary in the lower ward up to a council in the south of the kingdom and over the border to the master of the Pale Hand in the foreign city. The king listened to all of it. When Renwick was done, the king said, "Take him to the lower cells. Alive. He will write all of this down with his own hand. Then he will be moved to the Western Islands with his wife and sons. As I promised." The guards came in. They had been waiting in the hall. The other 3 lords, as they were leaving, did not look at the king. They looked at the floor. They had been at court for 20 years. They would be at court for many more. None of them would ever forget what they had just seen. None of them would ever speak of it. None of them would ever try. That night, in the lower wards of the city, the apothecary named Hala was found in her shop. The door was open. The candles were still burning. She was alive. She was tied to her own counter. She had not been touched. There was a folded letter on her chest. The letter named the 3 men who would arrive within the week to collect her, so she could be a witness for them when they did. She read the letter and she started to cry. She was crying because she understood, for the first time in her life, that she had picked the wrong man to cross. Lyra Vale woke up the next morning at 9:30. She was in her own bed. The curtains were drawn. The light through them was soft. Her father was sitting in the chair next to her, the way he had been sitting all night. She blinked at him. She said, "What time is it?" He said, "Late morning." She said, "I was going to the bookstall." "Did I?" He said, "You fainted in the street. You're going to be all right. The physician said it was something you ate. You'll feel tired for a day. Then you'll be fine." She watched his face. She had known him for 16 years. She knew his face the way other people knew the back of a familiar hand. She said, "Father." He said, "Yes." She said, "What is it you are not telling me?" He looked at her for a long time. He did not lie, but he did not tell her either. He said, "Nothing that you need to carry today. Maybe one day. Not today." She accepted this. She had grown up in this palace. She knew when to ask and when to wait. She said, "Was anyone hurt?" He said, "No." She said, "Did somebody help me?" He said, "Yes. A boy." She said, "Where is he?" He said, "He's in the kitchen. He's eating his second breakfast. He is being given a great deal of bread. He told me he has never seen so much bread in his life." She smiled. It was small, but it was the first real smile in that room in 20 hours. She said, "Can I meet him?" He said, "Later. Sleep first." She slept. He stayed in the chair. Around noon, the king went down to the kitchen. Toma was at the long table where the staff ate. He was working on a plate of eggs and dark bread and a thick slice of ham. The cooks were watching him. They had been watching him for 2 hours. They had been told by the king himself that this was the most important boy in the palace today, and that anything he asked for, he was to be given. When the king came in, Toma stood up. The king said, "Sit." Toma sat. The king sat across from him. The cooks moved away to give them room. They pretended they were not listening. The king said, "I want to ask you what you would like." Toma did not understand. The king said, "You have done a thing for me that I cannot pay for. There is no amount of money in this kingdom that is equal to it. But I would like to give you something. So tell me what you would like." Toma thought about it. He was a careful boy. He did not say the first thing that came into his head, which was a horse. He did not say the second thing, which was a sword. He thought for a full minute. Then he said, "I want my mother to not have to work at the laundry anymore. She coughs at night. She used to not cough. She started after she went to the laundry. She said it's the steam." The king said, "What else?" Toma said, "I want to learn to read better. The baker taught me a little, but he doesn't have time." The king said, "What else?" Toma said, "That's all." The king looked at him. He said, "Your mother will never go to the laundry again. As of this afternoon, your family will live in a house in the 3rd quarter, the one above the brassmakers. You will have a tutor. You will learn to read better than the men in this palace. When you are old enough, if you would like a place at this court, you will have one. If you would not, you will have your choice of any school in the kingdom. Your mother will be seen by my own physician for her cough. None of this is payment. This is only the beginning." Toma's eyes filled with tears. He did not understand them. He had not cried at any of the things he probably should have cried at. He cried now. The king said, "Do you understand why?" Toma said, "Because I helped Lyra." The king said, "No, because when no one moved, you did. There is no skill I value more than that. I will spend the rest of my life looking for boys like you. Most years I find none." He stood up. He put one hand on the boy's shoulder for 1 second. Then he left. That afternoon, the kingdom learned almost nothing about what had happened. A statement was read from the steps of the palace. The Princess Lyra Vale, the king's only daughter, had recovered from a brief illness. 3 lords of the council had been removed from their posts. 1 had been exiled. The Order of the Pale Hand was named, for the first time in 40 years, in an official proclamation. They were declared enemies of the throne. A bounty was placed. The city understood very little of it. But there were people in the city who understood it perfectly. There were old men in the lower wards who had been alive 40 years ago. They heard the proclamation and they went home and they sat down and they did not eat their dinner. There were vampires in foreign cities who heard the news 2 days later. Some of them disappeared from the streets they had been walking on for years. Some of them went deep underground. One, a man named Horan, packed a single bag and was on a ship by morning. He never set foot in the kingdom again. And there was a small story that began to be told in the merchant's quarter. It was told quietly. People did not say it loud because they were never quite sure whether they had really heard it from someone who had been there, or whether it was the kind of story that grew in a city the way moss grew on a stone. The story went like this. A girl fell in the street. Nobody moved. A boy with a tray of bread ran to her. He found a phone in her cloak. There was one number on it. He pressed it. A voice answered, and it was a voice that nobody in that quarter had ever expected to hear in their lives. And what the most feared man in the kingdom did next was not what kings do. It was what fathers do. He ran.